What's up guys? Today we're looking at my version of a build based around the unique Great Staff of the Crone. This unique makes it so that whenever we cast Claw, we also cast Storm Strike automatically with increased damage. My initial impression, like everyone else, was to do something with scaling your basic attacks as much as possible, but I didn't want to do exactly what everyone else was doing. It's a pretty simple build, so there really wasn't much room for innovation or changes, but I'm actually pretty happy with the results so far. The biggest change I decided to make was to not use the unique Tempest Roar. Now, I know this might sound really odd because it gives you access to much more abilities, but a rare helmet is actually quite good for this build. Let me explain why. With a rare helmet, we actually gain a ton of value from all 4 stats and the aspect. Stats like maximum life, total armor, and willpower are great all around. But more importantly are the other 2 stats we can get, basic skill attack speed and cooldown reduction. Both of these are incredibly good for the build because they give us much better uptime on the ultimate skill, Grizzly Rage. If we look at Tempest Roar, it's actually quite bad for the build. Poison resistance, maximum spirit, chance to gain spirit on lucky hit are all useless. Critical strike damage is also not very valuable in a rampaging werebeast build, and the damage while shapeshifted is quite low. The only benefit we really gain is the ability to use storm skills during Direwolf Grizzly Rage. And even then, that really only translates to gaining access to Hurricane. You can get 20% damage reduction with Hurricane, but this isn't 100% uptime. On a rare helmet though, we can use another aspect, such as Might or Vigorous, that will both be up 100% of the time. With the extra cooldown reduction and increased basic skill attack speed for more Calm Before the Storm procs, I am able to stay in Grizzly Rage nearly 100% of the time as long as I can actually hit multiple enemies. This build thrives on the ability to stand in the middle of everything and just hold down Claw. The more enemies we can hit, the more rampaging stacks we get, and the more cooldown reduction for our ultimate. With that in mind, we're built to be incredibly tanky through lots of damage reduction on our gear, aspects, and the Paragon tree with tons of additional sources of healing. I had some comments asking for some PvP footage in my videos, and this worked out perfect. I'm able to pretty much just hold down Claw and face tank multiple enemies at a time. This also leads into another part of the build I really enjoy, which is Shred. Normally you use Shred as a damaging ability, but because we don't spend our spirit on anything, we're able to use Shred purely as mobility. Along with our high movement speed in Direwolf, this build becomes very mobile and is able to stick to enemies, which is really important since we're playing a melee skill. Another addition to the build that I've been really enjoying is Rabies. Now, we're not actually using Rabies for the damage, more as a way to quickly spread poison across all nearby enemies. Because we're not using Tempest Roar, our Storm Strike does not count as a werewolf skill and will not be able to apply poison in an AoE for us through Toxic Claw. But using Rabies, we're able to quickly gain all of our poison modifiers, such as damage reduction against poison enemies and damage increased against poison enemies. We're also able to apply vulnerable to everything around us with the exploit glyph. This is honestly probably the weaker part of the build, but it's been pretty fun to actually get to finally use Rabies. I haven't pushed into very high nightmare dungeons yet, but so far from testing the build, it has felt great. I think to push higher, I will most likely have to add in even more defenses since we have to walk all the way into melee to do most of our damage. It's also felt great in Helltides with the movement speed in Direwolf and Shred allowing us to quickly move from pack to pack. I honestly wasn't expecting much from a basic attack build, but I've been blown away with how well it has performed so far. It also seems like Great Staff of the Crone is a fairly common unique drop. So I think this is a great build you can start running immediately once you obtain it. Direwolf isn't needed for the build to function and is mainly just a great way for extra scaling late game. I would not recommend playing this build though until you get the staff. As always with my builds, I want to remind you guys to make sure you check out the notes section of the build at the top here. Usually I have some great extra information in here. More importantly on the builds now, you can mouse over the gear, and I'm trying really hard to include the stats you want to look for on them. You can see as you go down, I try to keep them in most important at the top, going down to least important, but don't stress too much about it. Some gear has some other stats you can run in place of them, so I'll try to put them in the notes as well. Looking at the skill tree, this is a little bit different than most builds because we're actually trying to spend as many points as possible in the basic tree. Normally it's the opposite. You can see we've maxed out both Storm Strike and Claw and taking upgrades to both. That's because whenever we use Claw, we automatically cast Storm Strike, so any upgrades to both of them work. You can see we have Claw all the way up to 17 with our current setup. Behind Claw, we have Enhanced Claw. Now we're casting Claw, not Storm Strike, so the increased attack speed to Claw is very important. You'll notice throughout the build, I go for lots and lots of attack speed increases for a lot of reasons, mainly because of Calm Before the Storm, we can get more and more procs. If you look at Claw, when we were using the Great Staff of the Crone, it actually becomes a Storm and Nature magic skill, which is really important. Behind that, we have Claw has a 10% chance to attack twice. This is just a second attack and can proc anything, including Calm Before the Storm, so this is really important. You can also see on Claw, I'm all the way up to a 66% lucky hit chance, which is really good. It has a quite high base lucky hit, so it feels great. Same with Storm Strike, it's got an okay lucky hit chance, we're up to 33%. The big thing with Storm Strike is that we get 25% damage reduction, which is applied even though we're not casting it. It's getting cast when we use Claw, we still get the damage reduction. We have a chance to immobilize enemies, and then we have a 50% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds, which you can use if you feel like you have pretty good AoE, or usually I like to take a point out of here and I put it into Wild Storm Strike. I think the extra AoE feels better, gets you more Calm Before the Storm procs and more Rampaging procs. As we move down the tree, it looks quite different as I talked about. We're not taking Wild Impulses because we're not using any core skills. Down here we have 6% increased crit chance against close enemies. Crit is still important to help keep up Earthen Might, which we'll talk about later. More movement speed, because again, we're melee, we need to get to mobs quickly and stay on them. And then this is where Shred comes in. We have 1 point in Shred, and then we have the upgrade to Primal Shred. This makes it so that every Shred we use, the first, second, and third, will dash to a target. This allows us to stick to monsters and quickly move from pack to pack, which I think has felt great for the build so far. Moving down here, we have Blood Howl. We have reduced the cooldown of Blood Howl by 1 second on a kill, and then we have 15% attack speed. Along with this, we have Vigilance maxed out at 3. This is great for the build. We're constantly fighting and killing, which means we can keep up the attack speed on Blood Howl and the damage reduction from Vigilance. This is a great combination in the build. Here you'll see I actually took Cyclone Armor. Now Cyclone Armor gives you non-physical damage reduction, and then on top of it, preserving Cyclone Armor will give you 30% damage reduction for 2 seconds every 10 seconds when you get hit. This is really important because we're not using Tempest Roar, and you will not be able to use Cyclone Armor during Grizzly Rage, but both passive effects will still remain even though it's not on your bar. So you need to put it on your base bar, then when you transform into Grizzly Rage Direwolf, it won't be on your bar, but you will still have the passive effects, which is the most important part of it. Moving down here, nothing in the companion tree, and then we move over to here, Elemental Exposure. Your Storm skills have a 10% chance to make enemies vulnerable. Remember, our Claw is now also a Storm skill. So this is where our vulnerable uptime is going to come from, aside from the exploit glyph. This will also proc on every chain of Storm Strike. If you're noticing you're not having good vulnerable uptime though, again, you can change Storm Strike over to vulnerable and you have much better single target vulnerable uptime, but this has felt pretty good so far when you're kind of just killing everything within the exploit window. Down here, we have the usual Neurotoxin, which enables Envenom. Envenom is the best passive on the Druid tree. This is multiplicative critical strike damage. We've tested this and it is extremely good. You can see I have it up to 6 out of 3 because it's that good. And now more importantly, Toxic Claws. So whenever our Claw crits, we apply a poison to the target. This will keep 100% uptime on elites and single targets, which is very, very important because it enables things like damage reduction from poison enemies, damage to poison enemies, and Venom. Now, this is where the kind of interesting part of the build is. I've been running Rabies, and we go for the upgrade where this one unfortunately doesn't really do too much, but back here, Rabies spreads 100% faster. So essentially, you kind of go, as you go into a group of enemies, you use Rabies, and then it will quickly jump through all the enemies. They'll gain vulnerable because of exploit. They'll deal less damage to you because of our damage reduction, and you'll deal more damage to them. Now, you don't have to have this, but I actually just really been enjoying it, and I like having more abilities on my bar, and it really just kind of fit into the build. There's not too many other places to put the points anyway, so it's felt good. Down here, we have nature magic skills to increase damage to elites. Remember, our Claw is now a nature skill, so is our Storm Strike, so this works. Here we have your Storm skills deal increased damage to enemies that are immobilized. Remember, they're both Storm skills as well, and Storm Strike has a chance to immobilize. So this is pretty good damage increase. Then back here, this is just 6% more damage on our nature skills. Down here, we have Grizzly Rage with the upgrades, pretty common. unstoppable while we're Grizzly Rage, and this is where our main source of Fortify is going to be. You can see I even have like one kind of extra point I wasn't really sure what to do with, so I threw it in here for a little extra Fortify gain for now, until I find somewhere better to put it. Finally, down here, we have Earthen Might, which I think is incredibly important for the build. The way we're able to use this is through the Mighty Storm aspect. It lets Storm skills activate it. Both our Claw and Storm Strike will be Storm skills. So not only do we have a 5% chance to activate it, if we crit, we have a 10% chance on top of that. We have 15% chance. We have pretty good baseline crit, and then we have crit from Predatory Instincts, and then another 10% to proc it if the target is immobilized, which we're doing with Storm Strike. So that's really good value. Now, I know a lot of people have used Lupine Ferocity. I've found not really much success using this. From what I tested, this actually procs on every single hit you do, and it will be consumed on hit, not for an entire skill. So for example, if you use something like Tempest Roar, you would think to use this, right? But if you use it and you hit, there's enough mobs nearby, Lupine will only proc on the last Storm Strike hit, which is your weakest damage because Storm Strike goes down. So this really felt kind of wasted to use. It doesn't buff like Claw and Storm Strike all in one go. It's not per ability, it's just per hit. So this didn't feel good, and we're not using Tempest Roar, so we weren't really going to get much value out of this. This is why Earthen Might has felt really, really good. Moving on to our gear now. On our helmet, I talked about this before, we have cooldown reduction and basic skill attack speed. I only started looking for a good helmet recently, so I don't have a great one. Right now, I hit armor, not the greatest, but maximum life, armor, or willpower, depending if you want to go more defensive or offensive, is great. I have the Mad Wolf's Glee chest piece on. This is not needed for the build whatsoever, but I think this is great when you're farming or doing lower level content. This is going to get you more damage, more movement speed, things like that. This is probably what I will replace with a rare piece with the vigorous aspect whenever I try to push like higher nightmare dungeons. So this is not needed for the build whatsoever, but I do like running it for more damage. Down here, we have the gloves. This is where we have our Earthen Might. Key passive applies to storm skills, so we're able to use it with our storm skills. Crit, lucky hit, willpower, and attack speed. Remember, we can't get like plus ranks to claw or storm strike on gloves like you normally would with a core skill, so we actually can throw willpower on this instead. And remember what I said, make sure you're checking the build guide and mousing over the items. It has all the stats you want to look for listed on there. Moving down to the pants, I have pure kind of damage reduction and maximum life with the disobedience aspect. Disobedience is up quite often. The other cool thing about rabies, if you didn't know, is poison damage actually will give you disobedience stacks. So poison ticks quite fast. So whenever we rabies on something and it spreads to everything, that's going to keep our disobedience stacks up and keep us very tanky, which is really cool. Moving down to the boots, I use Ghostwalker here. There's some different things you can do here. I like this again for farming, and the ability to move through mobs feels really good, along with the move speed, of course. Willpower, damage reduction, all injured, total armor and werewolf, move speed, pretty common on the boots. Here's the weapon. Currently, I only have an 805. You can get up to an 820, I believe, on uniques. So a lot of room to increase the damage on that. Pretty good rolls on it overall. The thing you want to look for on this is you want to try to have the highest rank of claw after getting the highest item level. The item level is going to determine your base damage on the weapon, so that's the most important. Ranks of claw is important, and then non-physical damage doesn't work on claw because claw is physical damage, so that stat's not as important, but will work on storm strike. Damage to crowd control enemies is okay. The next stat I'd say look for is damage to close enemies will be good. Moving up to the necklace, currently I actually have rapid on here, which gives us goes from 30% basic skill attack speed to 45%, which feels great. Tons of things you can do on necklace. The things you want to be most look out for is cooldown reduction and ranks 2 in venom. Those are gonna be your top 2 stats you wanna look for on necklace. The rest you can do damage or damage reduction. Moving on to our rings, rampaging, this is incredibly important. Every time we crit, we're gaining 10% crit damage. And remember, we're going Earthen Might now, so we're critting way more often. So we're getting this stacked up very, very quickly. This is where we wanna fight as many monsters as possible because our Storm Strike chains will be stacking this up. Rings, vulnerable damage, crit chance, lucky hit chance, life. This is what I felt best so far. I don't go crit damage because we gain so much crit damage from rampaging, it loses a lot of value. So these stats have felt really good. Moving down here, this is where we have our direwolf aspect. You don't actually need to put this on your neck like you would in like a tornado or lightning storm build because we don't need the spirit cost reduction. You could do this to get more move speed on your necklace, but I didn't think it was too big of a deal, so I put it down here on a ring. Looking at our gems, we have damage reduction while fortified in our armor. We have fortify up constantly with Grizzly Rage. In our weapon, this is something you don't normally get to use, but we're actually using basic skill damage in our weapon, which both works on Claw and Storm Strike. So this is really, really good value. And then in our rings, we have the skulls for armor. Taking a look at elixirs, I really like the Elixir of Fortitude for increased life if you're looking to be defensive, but if you're looking to go offensive, I think the attack speed assault elixir feels great for the build because we're gaining so much attack speed. You could also try to go for the lucky hit chance elixir if you're looking for higher uptime on Grizzly Rage. Moving into our spirit boons, in the deer category, we have wariness for damage reduction against elites. In the eagle category, we have the 10% attack speed. Again, attack speed is very good in this build. In the wolf category, we have calamity, which will extend the duration of our Grizzly Rage. And then finally, in the snake category, we have the masochistic talent. Now, this will only work on claw, so it's not crazy healing, but it is still pretty good because we're attacking so quickly and we're critting very often with earthen might. And then here's the big one, calm before the storm. Nature magic skills have up to a 10% chance to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate skill by 2 seconds. This is where the attack speed is really coming in handy. Our claw can hit twice. All those things will start stacking up. This is why we want to go for lucky hit chance as well. This is what's going to get us to 100% uptime on Grizzly Rage. Finally, moving into the Paragon tree, I've kind of started switching this over to a more defensive version so that I can push higher nightmare dungeons. And it feels great not having to think about standing in melee and like taking too much damage. So I've really enjoyed this so far. As we move up through the starter board, as always, I take exploit glyph first as you're going through. You can move this later if you want, but this is the most important glyph on Druid you want to go for first. You want to level this up to 15 and make sure that this has the bonus activated. This is going to be a huge damage increase for you. As we move our way on up, we move into the Heightened Malice board. This is where rabies is going to be a big help because as we rabies, we spread poison to every enemy around us. And then we have 45% increased damage because all the enemies are poisoned. We move our way through some armor nodes over here so that we can get to this glyph, Fang and Claw. 150% bonus to all magic nodes around. You can see we've made the magic nodes path right through those. And then we get increased damage to close enemies while in werewolf form, which we're always in werewolf form. You can see the way I have this set up as well is we have just over 440 dex and 440 int. So this is really important. You need to make sure that you go over here next to the inner beast board so that we can get the rare node bonuses. We can get some armor damage in here. There's attack speed over here. We talked about how good attack speed was, some more armor. The glyph we're looking at is the werewolf glyph, 10% damage reduction while we're in werewolf form, and then damage while in werewolf form. Now, once you go over here, then you can go up here because we want to make sure if we go up to the Thunderstruck board first, and then we go over here, we're not going to get the rare bonuses we want. We want to make sure we get the rare node bonuses on the Inner Beast board. And now in the Thunderstruck board, you can see we've just got past the rare node bonuses, the 440 breakpoints. We have these here. This is very important because we have things like damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, storm skill damage. Here we have critical strike damage, damage to crowd control enemies, critical strike damage, and vulnerable damage. We have the Thunderstruck legendary node. Storm skills deal 30% increased damage to vulnerable or immobilized enemies. Both things we're constantly applying, and our claw is now a storm skill. Down here, we have the glyph Earth and Sky, bonus to magic nodes. You can see we take a decent amount of magic nodes around here, most importantly, the damage reduction from vulnerable enemies. And then we have nature magic skills deal increased damage to crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies. Great synergy with the build. Moving into here to the Constricting Tendrils board, we have the node Territorial, 10% damage reduction against close enemies. You can see we're going for all that sort of damage reduction so we can just face tank everything. And then we have damage to close enemies, a little bit of maximum life and willpower to activate the node bonuses. And then finally, we move up here to the Werewolf board. The Werewolf board is a little rough because we don't actually need Spirit because of the basic attack builds, but we can get the attack speed nodes here, which feel great. And then we just kind of move through these couple nodes just to squeeze out one extra glyph, 10% damage reduction the more fortify you have, and then damage while fortified. That's going to be it from me. I hope you guys really enjoy this build. I think it's a super easy build to get off the ground and get running. It was a little different than other builds, focusing on basic attacks. You don't have to worry about your spirit cost. I've really been having a lot of fun with it. If you guys have any questions, as always, make sure you leave them down in the comment section below. And until next time, I'll see you guys later.